Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's election forum for House District 46. My name's Steve Henson. I'll be the moderator for tonight's event. A couple of ground rules as we get started. First, we all know how polarizing our politics have been in our country, and it's something we want to try to avoid this evening. We can have different points of view, but we'd really appreciate it if you respect your candidate's opponent. You know, if you want to support your candidate by clapping and cheering and so forth, that's great. Do it. But please, when the other person's speaking, and let's listen to them and give them a full opportunity to state their opinions as well. The questions for tonight's forum, I've put those together along with submissions from the Chamber of Commerce membership, and the candidates have not seen the questions, although you wouldn't have to be a super spy to have gotten them because they're pretty close to the questions we've used in the previous two debates tonight. But they're topics that are critical for our country and also for our state. So what we'll do, the format is each candidate will have 4 minutes to introduce himself or herself to you, to ask for your vote, explain why they're running for office, and then I will ask a series of questions. We will not be taking questions from the audience. It's just too easy an opportunity for someone to ambush one of the candidates. You'd like to think that wouldn't happen, but you just never know in these days. So the candidates will be around afterwards. If you have questions for them specifically, I'm sure they'd be happy to answer those. So we did a coin flip, and the way it shook out is that our first speaker tonight will be Jonathan Ambler.
Thank you, Steve. Let me start off with thanking Dwayne Nava and the Chamber for hosting this debate, and of course, Steve Henson. We just got through talking about we do this about every 2 years, and it's good to see one another. So, thank you, Steve. What is a representative? Someone who is chosen to represent the opinions and views of a larger group. That's a simple answer to a complex question. House District 46 consists of a broad cross-section of people. Their views and opinions cover an expansive range. Nevertheless, there are some things we should all be able to agree with. First off, we value family. We care about families' health, safety, and futures. We also believe in fairness. This value has been enshrined in both our states and nations' constitutions as the principle of equal protection under the law. In recent times, it seems as though these values have been under attack. The state has undermined parental rights and placed our families in jeopardy. And our state is simply less safe because of decisions that our state legislature has made. Just last week, a mother told me about her son who had overdosed multiple times. She asked me bluntly, "Why can't we get this fixed?" It's a valid question. You would think that with all the money that Colorado spends, all of our problems should be solved by now. After all, the budget has doubled in the last 10 years, while our population has only increased 15%. Why has government grown 100% and things seem to be worse? Perhaps it's because our state government doesn't seem to represent us anymore. We, the people, rejected a ballot issue a few years ago, severely hampering our energy industry. Within 6 months, the legislature did it anyway. We, the people, passed a ballot issue to limit the expansion of fees without voter approval. The legislature simply made a workaround to get the revenue that they wanted. We, the people, prefer safety and our property protected. Nevertheless, the legislature passed the Misdemeanor Reform Act, which effectively decriminalized crime. These are just some of the examples of our one-party state government's achievements. So why aren't we, the people, represented? Perhaps it has something to do with Matthew 6:24 and serving two masters. Lobbyists and special interests are the primary influence on our legislature. Tonight, I ask you to consider which of us will represent you in the state legislature. It doesn't matter about the party. It matters whether or not your views, your opinions are truly being represented in our state government. Thank you.
And we'll now have opening remarks from Tisha Mauro.
Okay, thank you. I would first like to thank PCC, Steve Henson, Pueblo Chamber of Commerce for putting this together today. And I especially thank you all for being here and anybody who's watching. I'd like to introduce myself because I don't think a lot of you know me. My name is Tisha Mauro. I was born, raised here in Pueblo. I grew up out east of Boone, Colorado, way out there, on an 800-acre farm and ranch. I went to Boone Elementary School out in the sticks, which has since closed. It was a working family farm. That means my mom, my dad, myself, my brother worked on this farm daily. I got started as young as you possibly can, whether you're feeding chickens, feeding cows, feeding hogs, or irrigating, driving a tractor, etc. So I started learning very early about the value of some very important things, one of which would be water and our resources that are needed to be a good farmer in this neck of the woods. I think all of us Puebloans can agree water is a number one issue. I think we can agree that our farmers are some of the best in the nation, and that's where that all started for me. So like I said, I started at Boone Elementary School. I went to Excelsior Middle School. This is out in the Tules, both of which closed after I graduated from them. And you all know how devastating that can be to a community. When those small schools and that epicenter of your little small community closes, it really hampers your community. And that's something we've got to work on, obviously. I then went to Pueblo County High School. Then I went to, it was USC, now CSUP. From there, I met my husband. We got married. We bought a farm, had 2 children, raised them on a farm. So I've been born and raised on a farm my whole entire life. I guess I raised some kids on a farm as well. Like most farmers or people in agriculture, you then at that time need a second source of income for things like health insurance that you can't get easily when you're self-employed. You have those up years, you have those down years, and it's a struggle, so you need that constant income. So I entered the workforce, and I started out at the Pueblo County Clerk and Recorder's Office as a deputy clerk and learned how to do title work for automobiles. I worked there for 3 years. That's when after that, had my very first son. I have 2, just to explain, not very first. Anyway. From there, I went into the private sector, and I went into the car business and the auto industry as a title clerk, it's generally title clerk / receptionist. So basically starting in the mailroom. And I've been in the auto industry ever since for 24 years. And from there, this is a man's world, generally speaking, but I promoted all the way up to general sales manager, which is pretty much as high as I can get without trying to go into ownership. So I proudly raised my boys. They are graduated off now, and after my 24 years in the auto industry, I can finally take time and think about what is it that I want to do with my life. And that is, I want to give back to Pueblo. It's given me everything that I've had my whole life. It's taught me about community. It's taught me about our resources. It's taught me how incredibly lucky we are to live here and how I want to give back to that. And now I can do that now that my kids are grown. Very proud of the 2 boys. And that's what I want to do. I want to take my management skills that I've learned over the years, my leadership skills over the years in the auto industry, and, teamwork, actually, because You're not going to be busting through any doors as a woman in the auto industry 20 years ago without being a team and making it work and finding common ground with everybody, regardless of their belief or this belief. We all got to be on the same team for a common goal. And that's what I think I can bring to the table here. So that's what I want to do, and that's why I'm running. Other things that I've done, just to say out loud, I was on the Marijuana Liquor Licensing Board for 4 years. I've been on the Planning Commission. I was recently appointed by the governor to the 10th Judicial Review Board. And those are all things that I can add to my resume that make me feel like I am qualified to represent Pueblo. And I do feel like we have had strong legislation and voice at the state level, and that can be continued. It can always be improved on, and that's what I want to do, and that's why I'm standing before you here today.
Okay. Before we begin the question and answer portion, I wanted to thank the Pueblo Chamber of Commerce, the Greater Pueblo Chamber of Commerce, for taking on this responsibility for offering these forums. There was a void in the community when the Pueblo Chieftain stopped doing that, and the Chamber and the Chamber's board jumped in, and it's wonderful that they're doing this because it really is a great public service. We want to thank Pueblo Community College's Center for New Media for recording these and presenting them live and putting them up so people can watch them between now and the election, and also thanks to the generous sponsorship of Black Hills Energy, which is making this possible. So we'll begin the question and answer portion. Jonathan, you'll answer the first question first. Colorado has been unlike some states in that it has protected a woman's availability to abortion. Do you favor or oppose that position?
I believe in the right of life. I believe that that's a foundational principle that was taught by Thomas Jefferson in the Declaration of Independence. The right of life is paramount in our government. Thomas Jefferson understood the difference between being ruled by a government that claimed right of life as opposed to freedom. He understood the difficulties of how no one is safe in a government that believes it has right of life. It's the kind of thing that leads to elderly people being subject to having deadly disease moved into their homes in a nursing home. It's imperative that we as a people choose life. Thank you.
Okay. Tisha?
I support a woman's right to have a choice. This is a right that I have grown up with my entire life. It's nearly 50 years old and just recently changed, and I applaud the governor and the legislature of Colorado for getting out in the forefront and helping protect that right. That is my right, and by taking that away, it makes me less equal, and it makes me not free. And I think that is fundamental for every person to begin their day equally, whether it be women's rights, LGBTQ rights, and that's the foundation of that. And we've had it for nearly 50 years, and it's a medical procedure that should be discussed between a woman and their doctor.
Okay. Okay. Jonathan, rebuttal?
In Colorado, House Bill 1279 was recently passed. This bill was written intentionally vague and essentially allows a baby to be, quote, aborted after it's born. Just how much abortion does Colorado really need? That's something that we should, as a state, debate openly rather than having it pushed through the legislature despite how much public opposition the bill received.
Okay. Tisha, rebuttal?
I don't believe that what he just said is true. So I'm just going to leave it at that.
Okay? Please, this isn't about you. Let's let them debate, okay? Or you can run. Our second question, Tisha, you'll answer this one first. About half of our nation does not believe that our election results are accurate. So we're going to talk about that topic in a couple of different ways. The first one's a litmus test. Did Donald Trump win the 2020 election?
No.
Okay. Jonathan?
To be perfectly honest, as a former statistics professor, I don't know. There is sufficient evidence to suggest that a real investigation should be held. I don't know if the election was held properly. I do know that we are 2 years down the road, and there's no point in looking back. We have an obligation to move forward under any circumstance. I grew up in Texas. I know that elections get manipulated. Unfortunately, it's an American tradition. We do the absolute best that we can, but there are problems. I don't know about the last election. Election laws have changed dramatically in the last 10 years, and we haven't proved whether those changes are effective. Thank you.
Okay. Tisha, rebuttal?
I believe we have all the proof we need. They were highly scrutinized elections in particular states. There were 60-plus lawsuits that were not won by the Trump side, and we have ample proof. Every single thing they brought to light never had any factual basis and still doesn't to this day. But I agree with you in the fact that we're moving forward, and I do believe I think there's nothing more dangerous than insinuating we have unsafe elections when there's no proof. And we have gone to the courts. These things have been double checked. They have been double counted. So to continue to discount those facts is harmful to democracy, quite frankly.
Jonathan, rebuttal?
Again, as a former professor of statistics, I can tell you that statistics can be manipulated. I can tell you that there are not adequate safeguards in place in our elections. That's just a proven point. Case in point is ballot harvesting. Here in Colorado, we allow ballot harvesting. That means from the moment a ballot leaves the voter's hands, it's unsecured. And there's no way to monitor what happens to that between their hand and when it's counted.
Okay. Okay. Well, Jonathan, the next question's for you, and it's a lead-in from what you just said. Colorado's mail-in balloting system's been in place for decades, and people from both parties say that they think it's run pretty smoothly. Do you believe our state system is fair and accurate? And also, what else can be done to protect voter rights?
So, two-part question, and I've already talked about ballot harvesting, and it's a significant issue. We have reports of how ballots have gone to individuals in nursing homes and other locations that were incapable of voting and still were able to vote. The fact of the matter is, in days gone by, voters were in a secure location when they actually voted. Now, I personally enjoy the convenience of mail-in balloting, but a security issue is obvious. With ballot harvesters, you can take a ballot, you've got their form, their signature, you can alter that in virtually any way and then turn it in. It is an obvious and clear security issue. What I would do to help fix the election process, I see an excellent opportunity in just cleaning up our voter rolls. Part of the ballot harvesting problem is that we put out so many ballots that it's impossible to detect whether or not the proper number come back. We have addresses in our state that receive hundreds of ballots, and yet no one lives at those addresses. One solution, wipe out the voter rolls every 10 years. Right with the census. We have an extremely easy way to register in Colorado, and that would be a good way to keep our voter rolls clean. Thank you.
Okay. Tisha?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
Sure. Colorado's mail-in balloting system has been in place for decades, and people from both parties say it's worked pretty smoothly. Do you think the state system is fair and accurate, and what else can be done to protect voter rights?
Okay, yes, I do believe it is safe and protected, and I have a personal experience with it. My own son voted his very first time. He signed his ballot. Well, they didn't have any signatures on file for him to compare signatures to, and the district attorney's office sent out a letter to have him verify his vote, and of course, and do his due diligence at 18 years old, didn't meet the deadline, and his vote didn't count because they are checking. I toured. I'm not sure if Mr. Ambler's ever toured an election process or been an election judge like myself or been a part of this process for decades now. I hate to admit it, but I do believe it's safe, and there are many activist groups that are constantly checking these things out because a lot of these activist groups don't want them to be accurate to fit their agenda. But time after time, we have very minuscule voter fraud that would never change any election. And again, I would warn people to stop with the nonsense when you have no actual proof. When you can come to me with so-and-so's name, and this is what happened, and they've been charged with voter fraud, etc., which they're perfectly willing to do. I've spoken with the DA. They have an entire office and people working actively to make sure these are accurate, because there's nothing more sacred to our democracy than having faith in our elections, and I believe they are. And I would expand it further. Drop boxes are very secure if you've ever used one, and make it easier on people to vote. Yes, older folks need their ballot picked up. They can't drive. That doesn't mean there's fraud there. We just innately assume everybody is just going out for the wrong reason. I just refuse to believe that. Most of the people I meet, the vast majority of the people I meet, are very conscientious, they're hardworking, and they want their vote to be counted, and people respect that.
Okay. Jonathan, rebuttal?
To not have much suspicion leads to problems. As an example, again, a personal experience, I uncovered that 3,000 voters in Pueblo were registered in the wrong district. I then reported and filed a claim with the Secretary of State. They asked for evidence. I presented that evidence to the Secretary of State, and within a couple of hours after that evidence, Pueblo County was given an election observer. There are problems. My research took 20 minutes to do. The election office didn't do that. The newspaper didn't do that. Voters didn't do that. I went out of my way. It hurt my election opportunities, but I performed a 20-minute service to show that our elections are not as perfect as everyone claims they are. That's it.
Okay. Tisha, rebuttal?
Well, I appreciate you doing that, and I appreciate the state acting on that. And that's what it takes. If you do see something and you notice it, and I'm suspecting this is recently when there's redistricting, and human error does happen. I'm not going to say that, so I am appreciative of people keeping up and being involved and noticing, and you doing your part. But it was acted on, And I personally, at the November election, would like for the Secretary of State to also send down a supervisor early on so we can all have faith in our vote.
Okay. Okay, Tisha will answer this question first. What do you think the state can do to reduce crime and gun violence? And in the context of that answer, would you support a ban on assault-style guns?
Okay, well, I'm going to give you a little bit of background about myself. So I grew up out in this 800-acre farm. My mom and dad were very avid skeet and trap shooters. So as a child, I was raised around shotguns and shooting and at the shooting range. And I don't remember a time where a gun wasn't in my life at some point in time. We had a reloading room. I mean, this wasn't some small operation that we did occasionally for fun. I know how to reload shotgun shells, and I was raised that way. Raised out in the middle of nowhere where if you're a 10, 11-year-old kid out in 500 acres irrigating, it's kind of nice to have a shotgun because rattlesnakes are a big deal out in Boone. I'm grateful where I live now. That's not an issue. But in his neck of the woods and up in the mountains, it's not rattlesnakes always, it's other things. Bobcats, bears, etc. So it was a way of life for me growing up. And having said that, I never really thought we'd have a Second Amendment at that time in my life discussion. But having said that, 10 years ago, my son was in the Aurora movie shooting. He was in Denver. I was in Pueblo. He went to that midnight shooting. It was hours before I knew if he was alive, if he was dead, if he was injured. Obviously, through the chaos, he didn't have his phone. He had to, the story, I hate to even repeat it because it could probably make me cry to this day, crawl over bleeding humans, maybe possibly already dead, through the projector room and go to his own safety. So at that point in time, having grown up just taking guns for granted my whole life, and then knowing in those hours of, as a mother, I'm sure you can imagine, crazed, you just don't know what to do with yourself. Worst day of my life by far still. And sometimes I relive it with these other shootings, and I hope none of you ever have to go through that. And I'm blessed. My son made it out alive. Blessed. Not unharmed. That is a mental thing that doesn't go away, just to let you know. But then you start taking a different view. Because I guarantee you to this day, if I know somebody who doesn't own a gun, I couldn't tell you off the top of my head. But we've got to think of make sense ways of reducing the crazy people having the guns. And I have had multiple conversations with my largely Republican neighborhood in the farming community, and they are. But we've grown up together. They know me. They know I'm not crazy. I said, you know what? Tell me with all sincerity in your heart, 100%, you don't know one single person that you don't think should own a gun, and not one of them can do that. And from there, I can tell you, we can do some things that make sense. And let's start there. Let's start on things that we can agree on. The vast majority of the public believes in closing loopholes. I'm sorry, did I go over my time? Anyway, and I apologize for that, but I do have a lot more to say. And
You'll get an opportunity.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
That's right. Okay, Jonathan, we'll give you a little bit of extra time.
Just repeat the question for me.
Sure.
Sorry.
No. How do you think the state? What can the state do to reduce crime and gun violence? And in the context of that answer, would you support a ban on assault-style guns?
Okay, so again, a dual question, but so reducing crime, we shouldn't pass legislation that decriminalizes crime. That's probably the first thing we should do. The issue at hand as far as guns, gun control, Second Amendment, these issues. I have a niece who lives in Uvalde. I have a nephew that worked in the hospital during that incident. It's a very emotional thing for my family. I have an appreciation. I worked in schools. I know the problems that exist in schools, the risks and threats that are there. A recent incident in Canada shows that it's not just guns. It's violence in general. That's the problem. We here in America, we don't hear much about China, who have similar problems with violence, but those incidences take place with other weapons. Those kind of statistics tells me that crime in general is a separate issue from the Second Amendment. The purpose of the Second Amendment is to protect we the people from a totalitarian government. Are there other things that we can do to protect ourselves against crime? Of course. But that should be a separate discussion. Crime and gun violence is different. I believe that we need to take honest debate and stop throwing sound bites at each other and actually find solutions to our crime problems. Does mental health play a part in that? Yes. Does drug abuse play a part in that? Yes. We need to be open and honest as we debate the issue. Thank you.
Tisha?
Okay, so am I rebutting him or
You
answering
are
the second half of the
rebutting.
question? Rebutting. I don't disagree with that. It is a multifaceted question. I don't believe Americans are more innately homicidal, and that's why our homicide rates are so high. I think it has a lot to do with opportunity. I think it has a lot to do with education. You know, when we start all these things early, we can start helping all of these issues. So education, mental health, helping our police department. Absolutely, criminals need to be locked up. Dangerous criminals need to stay there. You know, I want Pueblo to be the very safest city in all of Colorado, and I support all the funding the police department needs to do that. But as far as the gun issue goes, it's complicated because there are things that we can do not to regulate guns from regular law-abiding citizens. I don't feel threatened that I would lose any gun I have by any of the regulations that are proposed and that are widely supported by all Americans across the United States. And I think we can sit down, discuss them, see what facts we have that back that up, and start there. You know, this has turned in such a, polarized, you're one or the other. I don't think it has to be that way. You know, I'm a gun owner. I suppose I'm reckoning a lot of you here are. And we can sit down and find ways where your rights are going to be just fine. You're a law-abiding citizen. It's not going to affect you. But if we can keep lethal weapons, as many as possible, as quickly as possible, out of the hands of criminals that may have been let out too soon, of mental health patients that have clearly been ignored for decades now, and other people that are just literally backed into a corner because they've got nowhere else to go and they really don't care anymore. So it's a huge issue, is my point.
Okay. Jonathan, rebuttal?
I think many of the problems that we face here in Pueblo are a direct result of legislative action. I believe that we can solve many of those problems through legislative action. Pueblo has become an example of high crime rates. And I don't blame our law enforcement because our law enforcement has had their hands tied. We've got to fix these things at the legislative level. And it requires us to change from where we've been the last 5 years. Thank you.
Okay. Jonathan, you'll answer this one first. In the discussion about how to make our schools safer, there's been a lot of discussion about making the physical buildings safer. You know, so-called strengthening the buildings with better doors and locks and better security physically. Do you think the state should be spending more money on that?
This is kind of an unfair question because I've been a teacher and a school district superintendent. I know what happens in schools. I know teachers leave doors unlocked. I know that there are human issues, human factors that are engaged in security issues. I also know that the Uvalde school spent over $1 million hardening their school. Somehow it didn't help. I believe that our school system is a contributing factor in school violence. I believe we need to make our schools smaller. We need to focus more on our students and on their safety. I believe that we can do a better job if we openly debate the future of education, that we open to greater ideas of securing the educational resources of our children and perhaps getting them out of a prison-like environment. I have heard many teachers and administrators talk about how much their school looked and felt like a prison. That is not conducive to an educational environment. It prepares children for an environment that we don't want them prepared for. I believe money can be spent in better ways. I believe we can secure our children in better ways. I believe we as a people can demand better. Thank you.
Tisha?
I absolutely believe that we can and should demand better all the way around on education. It's the list could go on and on and on and on. I don't even know where to begin. But the question was strengthening schools as far as doors and windows, and I believe absolutely, and let me tell you why. These are teachers that are trying to protect their students. Learning how, I saw videos online of how to secure your door with a chair and this nonsense. It's ridiculous that you can't shut a door and just move on to the next thing, which is getting their kids in their area that needs to be as safe as possible. And this is an onus we've put on teachers that they didn't go into becoming a teacher thinking that this is what their job has now become. I know a lot of teachers. I had some wonderful teachers, and these are people who are dedicated to helping these children in every way possible, whether it needs to be, maybe the 2+2 that week is not the most important thing for Johnny. Maybe letting Johnny talk about his home life a little bit and venting and finding a friend in their teacher is what we need to be focusing on. So yes, our problems with education are vast. I have absolutely no problem with funding better doors and windows, particularly in these new construction schools. Never going to be cheaper than doing it right now, that while they're at the construction level. And let's take the burden off of the teacher of figuring out how to lock that door properly in the horrible event that they have that. I pray not any school or any child in Pueblo County ever has to go through that. But in the event they do, that is not what I want them to have their brain on, is how to secure a door. I want them to be protecting their children and getting them in the right spot of that classroom.
Okay. Jonathan?
I've been that teacher that brought students home from a field trip into a hazardous situation and had police escort my students to their respective cars. I know what that feels like. I know what it's like to be in a serious lock the door situation. But I don't believe our legislature understands that. And I don't believe they're going to until someone like me is a part of that legislature explaining it to them. So that they know the hazards that exist in our education system today. Thank you.
Tisha, rebuttal?
No, I'm grateful for your service in education, but I don't believe you're the only one that would be in the state legislature with that background. So I think they have plenty of people they can refer to.
Okay. Tisha, you'll answer this question first. Pueblo's experienced a huge increase in the homeless problem, people panhandling at street intersections and forming little villages in various parts of the town. How can we deal with that? How can the state deal with it?
Well, like so many other things, it all comes down to funding and caring. It's prioritizing, knowing, these people are humans. Can anybody imagine? I was just thinking about it the other day, maybe a few weeks ago. I had a cold. I was under the weather, and I was in my comforts of my very nice bed that I enjoy every night with really good pillows and still just miserable. Can you imagine? Homeless people get colds too. Can you imagine trying to get comfortable and curl up to a nice, solid, cold, concrete bed? And, their lives are miserable. We need to understand that. I know nobody likes to see it on the streets, but these problems aren't just shipping them around as some cities do. We need to address it. And a lot of these same things that we need to be focusing on and funding, and we've woefully underfunded mental health in Pueblo County, decade after decade after decade after decade, and these are the results we get. Okay, so there might be the ones, get a job. Yeah, absolutely. There might be some folks out there that need a little help, little helping hand, maybe a couple of weeks of some shelter where they can get a shower, where they can get a job, and they have the mental capacity to hold down a job. And absolutely, it's cheaper to help that gentleman and get him on his way. Productive member of society is the goal. Off the streets, into work. Let's do that. They can't do it by themselves. Okay, but then we have a large amount of these folks that are veterans with mental issues, and I can't even believe we treat our veterans this way. We walk past them on the street while they're panhandling, and they're not getting the care that they need. And Pueblo is not equipped to handle that mental health situation, and we've got to spend money on it. And we can't keep complaining about the results of the things we keep not funding. And also drug addiction. Sure, if he's not on drugs, then he can get a job, but we can't ignore the fact that the guy is drug addicted. We've got to address that, fund it, and get these people, as many as possible, into a functional society, paying taxes like we all want them to be.
Okay. Jonathan?
So at a recent community meeting where the Pueblo Police and several agencies engaged the community, they talked about these issues, and they talked specifically about how Colorado Springs will load up their homeless and bring them to Pueblo.
Absolutely.
And I remember one of those representatives talking about how it was unethical for us to ship them back to Colorado Springs. But I question the ethics of having us pay for that. It's a complex issue, homelessness. Mental health is certainly an issue. Drug abuse is certainly an issue. But so are the economic factors that led to the homeless being homeless in the first place. We are missing out on those preventative measures up front. Too often, we let people descend needlessly when small amounts of help are helpful. We often see where charitable organizations should have been able to meet the demand but they're prevented to because of a variety of reasons. We have a need to help one another. We need to support families. We need to support families supporting themselves. I have a member of my own family that has mental health issues. The government didn't help that person, didn't help us. We had to help ourselves. We need to be more supportive of people who take charge of their own lives, families that help themselves. That's how we will solve these problems, is going back to fixes that worked before. Thank you.
Tisha?
I have absolutely no problem at all with helping families that help themselves, but we're talking about homeless people, and they need our help. They don't have that family structure, and we can't ignore it. And none of us like it. It's painful to watch. None of us want it on our streets or packed in front of our courthouses or packed in the corners of the buildings. And ignoring it is simply not getting the job done. So we have got to admit there's things that we can do and then do them.
Okay. Jonathan, rebuttal?
That debate is ongoing because we've seen so many examples in our country where we've got to do something, ended up in total failure. It's time to stop throwing money at problems and actually fixing problems. Now, our current problem came to us over time. But we don't look at the factors that impacted that. We don't do a serious analysis. We just jump at the opportunity to throw money at problems. That's what we need to do. We need to engage in serious debate and actually solve a problem. Thank you.
Okay. Jonathan, you'll answer this question first. Much of Colorado's ag economy depends on an influx of migrant workers. How would you propose balancing that need with the obvious need to protect our borders?
I wish our border wasn't an issue. I wish our country would make the decision to secure our border. I wish that our state weren't put in the position that we had to deal with that. We see governors and mayors of various cities and states across the country that are playing political games on this problem. In the middle of that are millions of people who are looking for better lives. Many of those people would come here legally if our immigration process were actually fixed by Congress as they were asked to fix it years ago. My son lived in Honduras for 2 years. Are there problems south of the border? There absolutely are. He's shared with me things that I hope he never experiences again. Do I feel bad for those people that want to live in a good, safe environment? I do. But breaking our laws is not the path to do that. We have the means to change things. I've worked with many people that have come across the border legally. They're good people. But this is an issue that our state should not be forced to deal with. Our federal government should secure our borders.
Having secure borders is absolutely crucial to our national security, and our federal government is doing their part. Can they do better? I'm sure. Well, when we have headlines every day of X amount of people being obtained at the border, that means that's the job that's being done. Now, it's two separate issues because keeping us safe against criminals, terrorists, etc., coming in from our borders, absolutely 100% national security issue. Now, when we're talking about our agriculture in this area and migrant workers, we do have very smart people that know how we can attend to that. We need the workers. Americans do not want to do these jobs, and they need the work, and they're willing to do it. Hardest working people I've ever met, and I've known a lot of them over the years, and so we need worker programs, and they're two separate issues. Absolutely, keeping the border safe, paramount. Separate issue is law-abiding, hardworking immigrants to come do these jobs that need to be done. That's not just in agriculture. It's huge in agriculture, but construction, other places they are absolutely necessary, and that is that void of workforce that we do not have right now.
Okay. Jonathan, rebuttal?
My wife hates it when I talk about her in political settings, but she works in the ag business. And she knows firsthand and has shared with me, so I only know it secondhand, that the migrant issue is one that is ruined by our federal government. These are problems that can and should be solved, and yet we've got so much gridlock in Washington. We have so much various problems that are needless problems. We as a state should hold the federal government accountable for these problems and get them fixed. Thank you.
Okay. Tisha?
And I would say that they do want to work on these problems. We just have one faction of our government at the federal level that just votes no on everything just out of principle and doesn't want to come to the table and have these discussions that you want to talk about. It's been proposed many times. They want to have a conversation, and they know there's a need there. It's not just in Colorado. States all across America need legal, law-abiding immigrants to help us. We need more workers in this country, and I guarantee you, Democrats will step up to the table and work on a worker program.
I thought we talked about this. Let's limit our reactions. Our next question, Tisha will answer it first. We all know how much Colorado is growing up north, Springs, Castle Rock, Denver, and even north above that. They're growing just like crazy, and they need water, and they need our water. What will you do in the legislature to fight for that water when you're outnumbered by legislators from northern Colorado?
Well, here's the beauty of the thing. They can't just come get it. We own that water. They can't just hostilely take it. And I've done a lot of research on water over my years. I will not claim to be a water expert, but I will claim for sure to know several people who are. And that is exactly one of the top reasons I'm running for this. As a farmer, as knowing our precious Pueblo County farmers, and what they, they're not going to go to the Capitol as a farmer and fight their own fight. They need somebody who knows what it is to irrigate. I have irrigated at 4 in the morning, 4 in the afternoon, just whatever it is. And you've never met anybody who knows how to squeeze the life out of a drop of water more than a farmer. And it's their most number one important thing, and obvious reason so. But they can't just steal it. We have to assist them in that, and absolutely not. They do not get our water. We need it. We need it for our farmers, and we need it for our municipalities. There's going to be $4 billion, thanks to our federal government, coming to Colorado to help with our water situation. And it's of utmost priority to make sure that water is allocated in ways to conserve water and ways that we can make sure it is in every way possible used in the proper fashion to help Southern Colorado. They're going to get their fair share all the time of that type of money. They always do. We will get ours, and they can't just come down here and steal our money like water barons. We would have to be willing participants, and we are not.
Jonathan?
I think you have much more faith in our legislature than I have. I don't know how we stop our legislature from stealing our water.
Because they don't own it.
I don't know how we get our legislature to believe in personal property rights. I don't know how we secure those things. I know that water is a profound issue. I know that so-called experts have been working on creating a new plan for 5 years. They've been threatened by the federal government to solve the problem, and yet they still don't. The federal government says they'll take over, but then they scratch their heads and say the same thing: we don't know the solution. Archaeological evidence shows that over the last 5,000 years, our area has reached levels of dryness that we don't understand. It could well be that that's just the natural flow of things, excuse the pun, of our area. That's what historical evidence suggests. We've got to be prepared to deal with much less water availability than we've ever known. Our water law was created 100 years ago when we thought, oh, it's always like this. But now we know better. And so we've got to be prepared for much less water availability. The experts have not figured out how to make it snow or rain. But one thing we do know is that Colorado is upstream of those that use our water most. We've got to protect ourselves in these circumstances. Thank you.
Tisha?
And the reason I know that we can do that and we don't have to rely on the legislature to do that is the legislature is not the people who own the water. I, for example, own some of this water and they can't force me to sell it to anybody. So I do understand drought. So my water rights are secure. But I do have a smaller piece of the pie when there's less water. So what we're talking about is winter water management. We're talking about conservation. We're talking about things of that nature, but people cannot just come take my water. I own it. And that's the same true with Pueblo Waterworks. That's the same with the Bessemer Irrigation Ditch. You can't just hostily take it over. And you're not wrong when the government said, hey, you need to come in and you've got to do these cutbacks because we've all seen what's going on in our reservoirs and lakes and dams, and it's catastrophic. But guess what? Colorado did do their part. Guess who needed to be yelled at was the lower basin valleys. So it's not like we are water experts in this state. We absolutely are. There's tons of people we can talk to. Can we improve? Absolutely. Can we use technology and new innovation to help us? Absolutely. But that is why this $4 billion coming our way, we've got to be prepared for. We need to assemble these folks who know all this stuff in a room and say, okay, what makes sense today, tomorrow, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 30 years from now, and make sure we don't waste one single bit of that federal money.
Okay. Jonathan?
As many of you know, this problem is a significant problem that is on the state and federal level to the extent that Nebraska has threatened to circumvent our water. They're planning on using their eminent domain power through the current law to take water upstream of where we're managing it. This is going to be a big fight between upper basin and lower basin. We've got to be prepared to understand that it will be a very long-term fight and that we need to be prepared for much less water. Technology is currently available in Israel. They're the fruit basket of the Middle East. And we need to exploit the technologies and policies that Israel uses. It should be a model for our laws and our processes. Thank you.
Okay. Jonathan, you'll answer this question. This will be our final question, and it takes a little bit of telling. So, most votes in state legislatures across the country and in Congress are straight party line votes. If elected, will you be willing to buck marching orders from your party, cross the aisle, and vote with the opposing party for a measure that is good for Southern Colorado, realizing the consequences that your party likely will ostracize you and take away all of your committee assignments?
Okay, that's a little bit of a trick question because Republicans are not that aligned. They vote any way they do. I don't know that there's more than 5 votes in this past legislature over the nearly 700 bills that were proposed where Republicans voted together. I can tell you that I can and will stand alone when I need to. I didn't feel comfortable contacting the Secretary of State about our elections office problems. But it needed to be done. I lost voters. I lost potential voters by doing so. But it was the right thing to do. And that's what I will do in the legislature.
Okay. Tisha?
Yes, absolutely. If it's something that I believe in strongly, I have no problem working with Republicans or whomever to get a bill passed that's going to benefit Pueblo and my community, our farmers here in Pueblo. Definitely. I will say, I think a lot of times people think that local politics and state level politics are the same as the United States government, where it's nonstop bickering, nonstop. I'm grateful to not be running for a race like that because that's not the kind of person I am. I've always been a person who's willing to sit down with anybody, find some common ground, work from there, and see what we can do for Pueblo, for our community. Let's better this place. That's what we're there for. But just recently reported in the Colorado Sun, the last legislature at the Colorado Assembly was 95% bipartisan. So I would venture to say that many of our state legislators are willing to sit down at the table and work with each other.
Okay. Jonathan?
There's been party switching recently, but I don't know that that's really the issue. The issue is whether or not you are going to be represented in the state legislature. You need to know that who you vote for will represent your views, opinions, and values. That even at personal cost, your representative will stand for you. I promise that I will do that for you. I don't make many campaign promises, but that's one I will make. I am honor-bound to serve you. Thank you.
Tisha?
I agree. That's what we're there for. If there is something that makes sense that's proposed by a Republican legislator, I have no problem at all jumping on board with that. It doesn't matter. It's about getting the job done.
Okay. Okay. We'll now have closing remarks. You may recall that Tisha won the coin toss and elected to conclude tonight's forum. So, Jonathan, you're up.
Thank you. And thank you. for participating in this process. The room's not filled, but as Steve talked about with me earlier, the people behind that camera will be watching over the next few weeks, and they'll be actively engaged in this democratic process. When I started tonight, I asked you to consider who would represent you best, who would represent your values. And as we've talked about in the last question, there may be times when that goes against party lines. And that's okay. George Washington, in his farewell address, told us to beware of party alliances. Because when we are more faithful to parties than to our constituents, that is the birth of corruption. I ask for your vote. I ask for your vote because we need to change things. If you're satisfied with the way things are going, the direction that we're headed, then you can vote for my opponent. But if you believe that we need to make significant changes to improve Colorado, then I ask for your vote to make those changes. Thank you.
Tisha?
Okay, I won't comment on the fact that he decided already that he knows how I'm going to vote when I haven't even done it yet, but okay. That being said, first of all, it's a great honor to be here tonight with all of you and anybody watching. I'm proud to be the Democratic nominee for House District 46. I love Pueblo so much. I've grown here all my life. I raised, excuse me, my family here. I want everyone to be proud of Pueblo. I want everyone to leave tonight on a high note going, you know what, we have so many fantastic things going for us, and we do. Things like CSUP that are helping us with our education process, where we can work with them to have higher education, where we can create new, higher, better paying career jobs right here in Pueblo. We don't have to always be the service industry, which is still a great help to ourselves and our surrounding neighbors. We can be proud of PCC right here. They do a fantastic job. We can be proud of our Riverwalk and the great strides that we've taken to upgrade downtown Pueblo. We can be proud of our Parks and Rec. Pueblo State Park is the most visited park in the United States, in Colorado. So we have a lot of things to be proud of. I am proud to be from Pueblo. It's my heart's desire to represent you, to make that even better, even stronger, strengthen your communities with good, solid education, with good, solid mental health and health care, safe streets. I want Pueblo to be the safest city in this state. And those are the types of things that I want to work towards every single day. And I thank you again for being here, and I would ask for your vote.
Well, we owe a debt of gratitude to these two candidates. It's hard to run for office. It's hard to put your name out there. It does. It takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of courage, a lot of commitment. You can take time away from your family. It's a thankless job, and in this day and age, it's really tough. So really, we do owe them a debt of gratitude. Thank you for attending tonight. That'll conclude our debate forum. We have more the next 2 evenings. We have 3 tomorrow night and 3 Thursday night. We hope you'll join us for that. And good evening.